just playing games. Rent is too damn high. What do y'all want me? You expect me to get up here and lie like everybody else? I'm Jimmy McMillan. People know me from the Rent is Too Damn High party.
Rent, it's too damn high.
So, Jimmy McMillan went viral 20 years ago in the city of New York with his The Rent is Too Damn High campaign. He was running for New York mayor at the time. It changed his life, I think. He's been famous ever since. He ended up dating a lot of younger women and is still fighting the landlords who want to evict him, according to an article I read last year. Anyway, this was a New York problem 20 years ago, but since then, it has spread throughout Europe, and we've seen recent protests across Europe, from Lisbon to Amsterdam and Madrid to Rome. Many people now think rents are too high across the EU. In fact, of those surveyed, more than half of all EU city mayors think that affordable housing should be a real priority now. And even here in Brussels, there's going to be a housing commissioner in the new European Commission team.
Take housing. Europe faces a housing crisis, with people of all age and families of all size affected. Prices and rents are soaring. People are struggling to find affordable homes. This is why, for the first time, I will appoint a commissioner with a direct responsibility for the topic of housing.
But what caused this? Why are rents too high? And what can be done, if anything? My name's Justin Stairs, and this is a Brussels Signal Explainer. So how did we get here? Well, back in the 1980s and 1990s, governments across Europe simply didn't build enough houses. This was then compounded from around the 1990s onwards, when there was thought to be a need for more migration both within Europe and from outside of Europe to solve the looming pension crisis. More working people were required, and the result of that was a big increase in the numbers living in Europe's major cities. This increase came without sufficient building. Since then, there has obviously been another factor, that you could call it the Airbnb factor. There are other applications as well, which has increased the problem, made it more severe in tourist cities in particular. Take Florence, for example, where the tourism impact is particularly heavy, and locals have been literally pushed out of their homes, in particular in the historical centre. Figures from last year suggest that 75% of Florence's short-term rentals are concentrated in just 5% of the municipal territory. The situation became so bad that the city was forced to intervene. It introduced a ban on new short-term rental listings last year. I have a quote here from the mayor at the time, who said, "We cannot watch our historical centre changing, and we cannot cope with all the problems of citizens unable to find an apartment to rent." That's the former mayor, who's now a Euro MP, Dario Nardella. There is also one problem which is specific to Europe, and that is, in Europe you have a lot of old, small cities which are run by local politicians who over the years have not really wanted to build high-rise architecture. They prefer low-rise buildings, and this obviously limits the number of people that you can get in to one small area. That's a problem, an additional problem that Europe's had to deal with. So what have governments done as this problem has emerged? Well, they've intervened, and there is an open question as to whether this intervention has done any good or has actually made the problem worse. One way of intervening is subsidizing housing for low-income families, for example. Another you could loosely call rent control. That means there are restrictions or a ceiling on how high the rents can go, and sometimes this ceiling is attached to inflation, for example, and there are other formulas as well. Here in Belgium, one of the many governments has restricted rental increases depending on the energy performance of your house. So if the house was well insulated, you can increase the rent by more than if it wasn't. There are many different ways governments have tried to intervene, but some say that these policies have actually backfired. One person who's pointed to this perverse policy, if you like, is Peter Klepper. He's one of the reporters here, correspondents on Brussels Signal, and I'm going to quote him. "Rental controls make investing in rental property less attractive," he wrote. "This leads to less supply, drives up rental prices on the black market, and causes housing shortages." Now, on top of this, you also have the not in my backyard phenomenon, a NIMBYism, we would call it in England, which means that even when governments propose the construction of large blocks of flats, for example, the people living nearby, they don't want it. This makes things even more complicated, and there you have a combination of factors which have driven up rental prices over recent decades. So this crisis started out with low-income families and individuals and has since spread also to middle-income families. And we've seen this in the statistics on when young people leave home. According to Eurostat, the average age for moving out in Europe now is 26, just over 26 years old. And in some outlying countries, for example, in Croatia, you won't be getting rid of your kids until they're 33. What can happen if rents get out of control is that tenants simply refuse to pay. It's called a rent strike, and there have been several famous rent strikes in Europe. In the 1970s, there was a rent strike that involved 350,000 tenants. There was another famous one in Spain, Barcelona, back in the 1930s, where 100,000 people refused to pay rent until prices were reduced. Since then, however, this has become a Europe-wide phenomenon. Oddly, at least one country, that's Austria, doesn't seem to have been affected. Don't quite know why. Let us know if you do. Anyway, it's now a continent-wide phenomenon.
Rent is too damn high because of the court system. The landlord attorney you meet in court are the same attorney who appointed the judge to the bench that you have to see and talk about. So they use these attorneys through the court and to help the landlords keep you out of these apartments. That's why the rent is going up, because they know you don't have the money.
So that's Jimmy McMillan, and his explanation as to why the rents are too damn high. He thinks it's a legal system problem. Okay, but in Europe, at least over the last summer, protesters have focused on another issue. They focused on tourism, in fact, and tourists in general, the idea being that if there were fewer tourists using applications such as Airbnb, there would be less pressure on short-term rentals, and therefore the problem would sort of solve itself. This is obviously controversial because in economies across the Mediterranean and elsewhere, local businesses are very dependent on tourist income, so this is not an easy problem to solve. Now, what do you think? Have you experienced the rent being too damn high? Have you been forced to pay above your means in the city you're living in now? Why not let us know in the comments below? And thanks for watching.